So for DPS units, they generally consider only like pure DPS and not the actual value of the character. So like if you end up in like needing like teammates like Galbrena does, right? Where you want like higher. Actually, Galbrena is like slightly underrated as like a free to play unit. I think people underestimate how strong she is with Mortefi. Obviously, she's not Augusta, but that is something to keep in mind for DPS units. This is not like a value thing. This is just purely strength. Let's go ahead and look through. So Augusta's T0. Augusta, one of the strongest DPSs in the game, has good free to play options as well with Mortefi. Pairs extremely well with as well. The only downside I would say for Augusta is that her teammates aren't too versatile. I mean, she has other options, kind of, that are like decent. She has like Lynae as an option. Technically, Lin is an option, though it's not great. Sheng Liao is also technically an option, though also not great. So she has like options, but they're kind of copium options outside of like her main teammates. Chacona, Cartia as a casual is probably the strongest character in the game right now. Her rotation is just too simple to perform. If you actually do have Chacona, yeah, they mentioned partner check Chacona over here. All right, perfect. Yeah. So as long as you have Chacona, she's the strongest character in the game. If you do not have Chacona, then Cartia does fall off quite hard. I think people underestimate, myself included, I used to underestimate just how hard Cartia falls off without the Chacona. She does have some options with Chisa. I have seen that, but they're not great. They're not great. Chisa, Arrow Rover, Cartia, and that can be an okay like team. But realistically, if you want the Chacona if you have Cartia. But yeah, she's definitely T0 material if you do. Galbrena is weirdly versatile. So I actually want to talk about Galbrena a little bit because there's a concept I want to break down. One of the things that we're noticing a lot in Wuthering Waves, and I don't know if a lot of people are bringing this up or not, or even thinking about it. The amount of shield buffs. Actually, hold on, let me go to tower real quick. Enemies all attribute res is increased by 15% when resonators with the shield are unaffected with this effect, and when enemy takes Toon Rupture damage, this effect is removed. Characters that can actually pair with other characters who have abilities to interact with shield buffs, or can interact with like shield buffs themselves are insanely powerful, and I think Galbrena is one of the strongest cases of that. I'll give you an example for this. She can pair with Lynae. That's a good team, right? You can do like Lynae Mornye could be a team. You can do Lynae Lupa. That's a good team for Galbrena too. If you want to go for the shield effect, for example, you can go with Brant, right? So you have Brant, Galbrena, Lupa. You can do Mono Fusion there. That's really good for this. Then she has her own capabilities. She can play with any fusion buffs. So if there's ever any fusion chilling, she's really good there. She's a heavy attacker. You can do the heavy attack specific rotation on Galbrena. I have a guide for it on the channel. That means that if there's ever heavy attack buffs on here, you can make use of that. If there's ever echo skill damage buffs on here, she can also make use of that with her echo skill rotation like she does with Qiuyuan. So Galbrena actually has the most flexibility out of any DPS as far as like interacting with the actual show buffs goes. So I think it's a pretty underrated trait inside of DPSs right now, especially with the shield buffs like this becoming so much more, they're just so much stronger now compared to what they used to be, right? Like this is just 15%, you do 15% less damage for fun. So having a character that's actually able to interact with a bunch of different shield buffs, able to take advantage of a bunch of these different effects and pair with those other teammates, having that versatility, insanely underrated. I think Galbrena is probably the most underrated DPS right now. I've seen so much slander on her name, especially since launch. She has a bunch of teammates she can go with. I mentioned Lynae. You can do Mono Fusion stuff, right? You can do Qiuyuan, you can do Flova, you can do actually that's kind of it. Weirdly, for as far as DPS goes, that's actually kind of high. Like think about Augusta, think about Cartia, which we mentioned before. Like Augusta has like 4 teammates you compare with. Cartia has like 1. Flova. I've considered Flova just the best pull value DPS in the game for a long time. Obviously, this is a tower specific list, so they're not considering like Whimpering Waste and whatnot. But if you are, we'll get to that in a bit. Flova is obviously disgusting there. Over here, she has a bunch of options. She can pair in Quick Swap, right? She goes with Echo skill buffers like Qiuyuan. You can go with Resonant skill buffers, like you can even go down to like Brant and she'll still clear. Her one downside, she does lose a good amount of damage without her signature, but I am still getting clears pretty easily even without her signature. Like I'm using Cosmic Ripples on my Flova. I don't even own her signature. It's not too hard to clear, assuming you have like this teammates. Now, she also has one of the best free-to-play, under-talked about teams in the game. She can pair with Don Jin, which is a character that other people can't utilize. Traits that I see often not talked about as well inside of games is the ability to take characters that other people don't use and elevate them, especially ones that are free on your account, right? Donjin is a character that's basically freed up on your account. Most people aren't going to be using Donjin. There's no one who really uses Donjin as a sub DPS outside of Flova. Maybe you can do like Camellia, like I've used it with Camellia, I've used it with Havoc Rover, but for the most part, it's like Flova's her best use case, right? In that sense, being able to take that away from an account and actually use it well is extremely, extremely useful. Think about it like this. Or let me put this in perspective. If you're someone like Augusta and you're taking away a Mortefi, what does that actually do to an account? Mortefi is an insanely versatile character. Literally the best 4-star in the game by, I think, a good amount at this point. Right? He has a bunch of versatility. He can go with Augusta and be insanely strong there. He can pair with Lupa and go with a bunch of teams there. He can pair with Galbrena. He can pair with Qiuyuan. He can even pair with Jinchi, right? He has a bunch of versatility. So taking away a Mortefi from your account actually devalues your account a good amount because it lessens the amount of options you can go for. But on the flip side, if you take away a character like Donjin, which a lot of characters aren't actually utilizing, you actually put your account in a better position for utilizing a character like Donjin. So I actually value Flova really highly in accounts because of that. And I think I really think people don't actually consider very often what happens when you pull a character and what characters they take away from your account. This is something we talked about in other games though. Like if you use a Bennett on the team, right? You can't use a Bennett somewhere else for anyone who plays Genshin. You don't get 2 Bennetts. You get 1 Bennett. So a character who ends up taking Bennett is a plus because Bennett's a 4-star unit, but it's also a minus. The same is true with Mortefi. If you take Mortefi as the best 4-star unit, as the best free-to-play option on your account, outside of maybe like Havoc Rover Verina, that's a big deal because he's one of the best free-to-play versatile options. So I really value Flova highly because she can use Donjin. Well, I value her highly regardless because she's just strong. All right, let's see. I think initially at launch, when Lupa came out, I think I actually undervalued Lupa. I think Lupa is a character who has grown better over time though, obviously with additions like Galbrena, and now with Mornye as well. I think Lupa is more than justified of being up here. I remember when I made the pull value tier list and people were putting Lupa or like complaining that Lupa was in A tier. They wanted her like low A and whatnot. I think that's completely unjustified. Just because a character is tied to say like fusion as an archetype, for example, doesn't mean that character is not versatile. Think about how many fusion characters there are in the game, right? She can pair with Chun-Li. She can pair with Galbrena. She can pair with Brandt. She can pair with Mornye. She can pair with Encore. She can pair with Mortefi. That is 7 characters? That is I think, hold on. All right, that's 6 characters. I have brain damage. She can pair with 6 different characters. That may not sound like a lot, but weirdly, that is more versatility than 90% of the cast. So just saying that a character can only pair with fusion characters doesn't actually mean anything. You have to put context. How many characters, once again, can Augusta pair with? It's Mortefi, Lynae, Baby Sheng Liao. If you're turbo coping, Inland, that's what you're pairing with. Right. Look at other examples, like look at Cartia. You can pair with Chacona, you can pair with Chisa, or you can eat shit. I think people just don't realize that just because a character is stuck in an archetype doesn't mean that they're not versatile. So I'd actually consider Lupa a pretty versatile character, even though she is needing other fusion characters, just because there's so many fusion characters she can pair with. Also, no, I do not consider Chisha, for the sake of this, because I'm trying to consider like more free-to-play options and whatnot, I'm not considering Chisha a real fusion character, but yes, Aemeath is a good example too in the future. But I mean, technically we don't know if they'll have value, but it's pretty likely. Lynae, people kind of got mad at me saying Lynae is just like the best value sub DPS in the game. Not really sure why, or that she belongs in like kind of a tier of her own as far as sub DPSs go. I mean, obviously with Mornye, Lupa has gotten more versatile, so I do think it is justified to move Lupa up towards that similar area. The thing about Lynae is if you are like an older unit, Lynae is just your BIS period, right? If you're a Resonance Liberation character, Lynae is your BIS. And for everyone else, Lynae is like their second BIS. This character is crazy. She goes with every character in the game. She has Shorekeeper levels of versatility as a sub DPS, which is something we can't say about any other character in the game. Think about historically every other sub DPS character, right? Even like Yuno's pretty versatile, but she can't go with every character in the game. She can pair in like quick swap stuff. She can pair with the mono arrow stuff. She can pair with heavy attackers, and that's it. And that's considered a really versatile character. Like I consider one of the best sub DPSs in the game, and that's her level of versatility. Think about Qiuyuan. He can pair with Galbrena. He can pair with Flova, or he can go fuck himself, right? That's the levels of that's the realistic level of versatility we have for our sub DPS characters. People really underestimate just how valuable having a character like Lynae on your account, like a good, strong generalist that is not only a generalist, but also elevates so many teams. Lynae is just broken. On top of that, if you're someone who does not get signatures, Lynae gets even more value because Static Mist is so strong on her. So that's something to keep in mind. From a pull value perspective, Lynae is very strong. All right, Mornye, I have mixed feelings, and we kind of talked about this early on stream, but I'll give like a quick summary here. So Mornye's in a weird spot where, let me pull this up. In DPM, your healers, as you can see here, have the option of being used twice, right? So that means Verina, that means Shorekeeper, that means Mornye, that means Baisha. These characters can all be used twice, right? What that means is for an account, you only need 2 healers for you to have 4 teams worth of characters able to be played. For most accounts, 90% of accounts have Shorekeeper, and nearly 100% of accounts should have Verina, because she's a free character. You'd get her for losing 50-50s. At the very least, you would get her eventually, right? It's pretty likely you have Verina on your account, and it's extremely likely you have Verina and Shorekeeper on your account. Most people just have these characters. I think they're the most owned characters in the game, probably, outside of like the 4 stars and Havoc Rover. Or Rover in general. So that begs the question, where does Mornye come in? Because you're going to have to take over the slot of either Shorekeeper or Verina. Mornye only outperforms Shorekeeper in comps where she's with specifically Lupa or Lynae. So that makes her less versatile. She needs to pair with those characters in order to get value. But what that means is you can only use them once. You can only use them once inside of this game mode, right? The Lynae and the Lupa. So she loses versatility there. On top of that, Lynae and Lupa also have other options. You can just pair them with Verina. You can just pair them with Shorekeeper. Both these characters are versatile. Most accounts, once again, own Shorekeeper, and nearly every account should own Verina. She's a free character too. As we just mentioned there, if you are not using these characters with Mornye, then she goes down to near Verina tier in terms of usability. Does that mean Mornye is bad? No, Mornye is a good character, but you have to consider what a good character means in the context of what you have available on your account, right? Actually, this is a great example. Everybody knows Sunhua is a strong character, right? She has a really fast rotation. She has good buffs because of that, right? And she does a good amount of damage for her field time. But you have to consider that within the context of the meta. There are no other basic attack characters that are actually strong right now, right? So Sunhua has literally 0 value. Well, not literally 0, but she's pretty low in value because of that, right? And that's the context people don't consider. Mornye's value, when everyone owns Shorekeeper and everyone owns Verina, goes down extremely hard, which is unfortunate to say because I actually like Mornye more than I like both Verina and Shorekeeper. But the reality is most people probably shouldn't be pulling for Mornye. Maybe in the future, as they start valuing or they start maybe like chilling Toon Break more, Mornye would get more value, or maybe future releases will make Mornye strong. And to be clear, Mornye is still a good character. If you like her, like, you're not going to brick your account getting her. She is strong. It's just like there's not much value to be obtained from getting Mornye if you're a player who already has Shorekeeper and already has Verina, especially when the last thing I want to bring up, mono element teams are teams that don't even run things like Shorekeeper or like Verina, healers in general. Example, think Mono Fusion. It's Galbrena, Lupa, Brant, right? Or it's Lupa, Brant, Chongli. Think Mono Havoc. It's Consorella, Rochia for Flova, or Consorella, insert X here, like Havoc Rover, Donjin for Flova, right? Those are examples of teams. Cartia, Chacona, Arrow Rover. It's Mono Spectro. It's Zani, Phoebe, Spectro Rover, right? So there are other team comps that don't even use healers in the first place. Plus, most accounts have 2 healers on it, so that just devalues Mornye. If you already have Shorekeeper and you already have Verina, Mornye loses a lot of value in your account. You'd get better value out of making other teams for now. But if you don't have Shorekeeper or you do like Mornye, it's not like she's a bad character. She'll obviously perform. Just consider the context of your account if you're considering pulling her. Because once again, you can use each of these healers twice and you only need 2 healers. So if you already have Verina and Shorekeeper, what value you're getting from the Mornye? Though it is nice that she only needs Discord. Carlotta. So I kind of flip-flop back and forth on Carlotta because technically her DPS is really outclassed at this point. But one of the things I've noticed about Carlotta, especially when we're talking about the casual player, is that she is so insanely brain dead, and especially when you don't understand boss mechanics, a lot of players will end up messing the rotation and making the rotation take longer than it should. Carlotta has the nice thing that her rotation is actually really, really fast and really, really simple, meaning you can focus more on the enemy boss patterns, and even if you mess up your rotation, you'll still make it within that 25-second window faster, right? So you'll actually make it and keep up like what is considered like sheet DPS around that area, right? If your rotation, like your base rotation is like 23 seconds or whatever, you get back, you have like 2 seconds left on your ultimate if played optimally. Even if you waste that 2 seconds inside of the fight, you're still within that 25 seconds to come back before your ult comes up. So you haven't actually lost much DPS. I also want to point out something that I've noticed when I see other people playing Carlotta. If you're playing Carlotta in modes like Tower over here, this is a guide video, by the way. It's fine. I've wanted to point this out for a while. So buffs like this, where you see the after 60 seconds after the battle starts, rest enemy's total damage increases by 5%. After that, their total damage increases by 5% every 5 seconds, up to 60%. With buffs like this means that having your ultimates more backloaded, right? Or having your ultimate get done as close to the end of the timer as possible means that you're going to do more damage. So the way you play Carlotta generally is going to actually change. So that means you're going to have to use earlier ultimates. You can't just do like your standard 1, 2, 3 like you would normally. You actually have to adjust your Carlotta rotation to get the most damage out of her ultimates by delaying your ultimate. That means tanking your first ultimate and doing less damage from it, not having maybe full buffs or something like that, right? I don't see a lot of people doing that. I don't know why. I just wanted to point that out. I think people do overvalue Carlotta and overestimate how much damage she does because they've had her for so long, because they have signature on her, because they have really cracked echo since they've had her since 2.0. She's one of the most owned characters, and they always have their skills maxed out on her, right? And she's super simple to play. I think people overestimate how much damage Carlotta actually does, and if they truly knew how much stronger newer teams were compared to Carlotta, even with Lynae, they wouldn't value this character as highly. But I will say there is something to be said about an easier to play character. Would I have her in T.5? Actually, I guess looking at the characters in T1, I would. Yeah, actually. Yeah, looking at the characters down here, I would. Yeah, I guess T.5 is fine. So, main DPS is obviously very strong with Lynae. Lynae just hard buffs any Resonance Liberation damage buffer. Without Sig, they have her in T.5. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And then obviously with Sig, we'll get to in a little bit, they have her in T0. So yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Not much for me to say here. What we can do, actually, let me tie in the sub-DPS. So I think for an account, is actually an extremely versatile character, which kind of contradicts a lot of what I thought about her at the start. Now, I will say, as time has gone on, she's aged better, and I didn't consider the arrow wheelchair. For those who don't know, her and Chicona can be put on a team together to basically wheelchair any arrow character in the game. You can even use Qiuyuan as a main DPS and end up clearing with that comp. You can put GN on there, and you can clear with that comp, right? As long as you have an arrow main DPS character, you can just use those two characters and they just wheelchair it across the finish line. Can also pair with things like Arrow Rover if you end up in a pinch and you need the extra healer for whatever reason, right? So she has like a small amount of value there. And then obviously she's one of the better sub DPS characters with like things like Augusta, right? So actually has a lot of value in it. Expert tag on Zani, have her at T.5. So obviously, if you play Zani in like Mono Spectro and you play with like Quick Swap and you use the Spectro Rover, Zani is one of the best characters in the game. I've demonstrated it a bunch on this channel. Watch speedrunners have demonstrated it as well. When you're in neutral content, she performs the best as far as clearing content as quickly as possible. So Zani, strong character. Now, expert tag on here, I think is justified. One thing I've noticed is that if I play Zani without playing her in Quick Swap, it is extremely awkward to play her. Mostly because her animations just take way too long. And also, like, if you're only doing standard 1, 2, 3, you're not doing any Quick Swaps, you're not doing any Nightfall cancels, you're just playing baseline Zani, you're just not doing that much damage, right? It's like Carlotta tier as far as damage goes. I do like that they put expert tag here, but like even if you do, I mean, I guess you're gonna have characters that are differentiated between tiers. Like Carlotta is technically like less damage than these two, but I guess it's fine. You can consider ease of access. They have the expert tag. It's fine. Not much for me to say. Obviously, if you're gonna play Zani, please get a Phoebe, bro. We touched on Chicona briefly when we talked about Chicona's main value comes from pairing her with Cartia. She does have wheelchair value with other arrow characters. One of the biggest values from Chicona that we'll see over here in a second is the fact that she provides arrow shred on her weapon, and that's why they end up putting her in T0. You don't get access to that if you don't have her signature, so she's over here in T.5 because it makes it harder for her to wheelchair. Though, you still have one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet. If you pair arrow units, arrow main DPSs with Chicona, hitting a target with arrow erosion increases crit rate by 10% and grants 30% arrow damage bonus lasting for 10 seconds. So if you're playing an arrow character, like an arrow DPS or whatever, and you're pairing with Chicona, you get to use this set, which just gives you an extra 10% crit rate for free. So you will have to change your set if you're playing things like GN or you're playing like Qiuyuan, like we mentioned earlier, as a main DPS, which would not suggest, but it is technically something you can do. But that is like a buff, and I think when people hear wheelchair, they don't think about the fact that they'll have to change their gear. So that's something to keep in mind. What I'm getting at is this. It becomes more effective when you have a signature, but it's still effective even without the signature because you get the extra set where it gives you an extra 10% crit rate. Yeah, I think this is pretty accurate. We already touched on, there's not much more for me to say here. Let's talk about Havoc or Arrow Rover and Verina. Would I put Arrow Rover in the same placement as Verina? I mean, technically he does have a stronger team, like a much stronger team when he performs with like Cartia, and then he has like some usability with I would heavily weigh him down just from like how clunky he is to play. I would put it, I'm almost justifying like putting him in like T1 just for how clunky he is to play. I think people don't talk about like the reality of characters actually performing their kits and like getting their concerto and all this stuff too much. I think Arrow Rover can easily break your rotations and lower your DPS pretty hard. So I'd put him in T1 personally, but I can see the argument for putting him in like T.5. And then Verina, not much to say, just good generalist character. I've mentioned her as like she's a free character. You get her for free. She's a good generalist. She can go in a bunch of team comps. She's just a solid option. Definitely deserves T.5. She's literally carrying my account right now, bro. She's the only healer I have on here. Everyone has 2 T0 TPS and he's T1. I'll actually touch on that in a second. Encore going up. Encore, I think, is a super underrated character. I think she's been underrated for a long time. If you actually look at her performance with characters like her Lupa Mortefi team, for example, her performance is really high. It gets on limited level, right? But people have been underrating her as like she's just like a standard banner character. She has like relatively low cost teams if you just go for like Lupa plus like Copium stuff that technically can clear. Obviously, if you go for like things like String Master, she becomes stronger from there. I think Encore is an underrated character. She's actually like a legitimately solid character. So yeah, I think moving her up is pretty justified. They have GN over here with the expert tag. So the expert tag is mainly if you play quick swap stuff with like Chacona and whatnot. Yeah, if you do play that quick swap stuff, they are expensive teams. Do keep that in mind. So you're gonna have to invest a lot into your GN to get him up. And he is being wheelchaired across the finish line. Those characters that you pair with him literally have better options. So you're playing GN because you want to play GN, not because he's actually performing here. But yes, he technically is a decent character when he gets wheelchaired. I'll give GN that. Phoebe main DPS. I actually think Phoebe is a super underrated main DPS character. Not because she's like super strong, but because she's stupid versatile. Literally, the only thing you need on your account is a Spectro Rover. And then from there, you can just pair anything with it. The thing is, Phoebe's damage distribution is all over the place, right? So she uses a combination of like heavy attack plus normal attack plus liberation and whatnot, right? So what that means is she can pair with a ton of different buffers. So she works with you can pair her with there for a heavy attacker. You can pair her with Sanhua. You can pair her with Mortefi. You can do some copium stuff and throw her in like quick swap teams, right? And even those will clear. I think Phoebe is super underrated. I think T1 is justified. I think she might be the most underrated DPS character in the game. On top of that, if we're considering like boss mechanics and having to dodge and being like more free to play friendly, as long as you dodge a boss mechanic, you can bypass your rotation and just throw it her heavy, right? As far as like messing up rotations and whatnot go, you can actually shorten a rotation quite heavily by doing that. I think Phoebe is an underrated character. She's not like super strong, but she's definitely underrated. Now Qiuyuan. This is one that people have been complaining about, moving Qiuyuan down to T1. I completely agree with this. I think Qiuyuan is a character who pairs with characters who have other options. He suffers from the same problem that Consorella has. Now, is he strong with those characters? Yes. Qiuyuan is very strong with Galbrena. He's very strong with Flova. But both Flova and Galbrena, as we mentioned earlier, have other options. Galbrena pairs with Lupa. Galbrena can pair with Mortefi. Galbrena does not need Qiuyuan. Qiuyuan needs Galbrena. Flova pairs with half the roster. Flova does not need Qiuyuan. Qiuyuan needs Flova. So this guy needs one of these two characters in order to perform. Or he needs to be wheelchaired as a main DPS, in which case he's performing even worse than GN. So he's not even like really good there either. So he doesn't have value there. It's important to keep in mind that, especially for like sub-DPS characters and whatnot, the amount of value you're actually gaining from pulling that character matters a lot. And when the DPS characters you're pulling have a lot more versatility, what is the actual value from pulling a Qiuyuan, for example? If Galbrena can pair with like 7 different characters or whatever, how much value am I gaining from getting a Qiuyuan to increase her? Like, sure, it's nice. He goes with two T0 units, but it's not that much value. It's one of the biggest issues I have with Consorella as well. People will say that Consorella goes with Flova, but Flova does not need Consorella. Consorella need Flova. Consorella is not with Flova. She's copium. I also do want to point out that in reality, Qiuyuan ends up getting interrupted pretty often in his team comp, so that's an issue. If you pair it with like Galbrena, for example, I've had issues where like his forte doesn't even connect to the boss, and so I end up losing out on energy, so it breaks my Galbrena's rotation. That's less of an issue with Flova because she obviously doesn't have energy, so it's not as big of a deal for Qiuyuan, or for the team comp as a whole, rather. But it is something to keep in mind. I had issues with that when I was playing main DPS. Qiuyuan as well. It was screwing over my Lynae during the rotation. Main DPS, Qiuyuan is also kind of copium. I wouldn't recommend it. I play it kind of for meme. Chisa. I know a lot of people are kind of angry about Chisa being in like lower value. I guess T1 is like kind of an okay place to put it. It is technically the strongest casual team in the game if you do get the Chisa with the Cartia. Though that is with signature, they don't have her with signature here. But when you have Arrow Rover free, and I consider the context of that, like Arrow Rover just existing on your account, the only reason to really pull Chisa right now in the current state of the game is that you want to free up Rover for another team. So if you're playing like Mono Spectra or something, you can pull Chisa so you can free up Mono Spectra for your Zani. Or you want to play Havoc Rover on another team with like maybe for Flova, or you want to play Havoc Rover Sanhua Shorekeeper, right? Those are the main reasons you would pull for Chisa. Outside of that, you're pulling her because of waifu. You're not pulling her because she's doing anything for your account. She's not weak. She just doesn't provide anything that free characters don't currently, and that makes her... She suffers from a similar problem to Mornye, except she's less versatile than Mornye. That's a good way of putting it. Spectro Rover pairs with Phoebe and Zani, and that's about it. That being said, there is one thing that I haven't seen people talking about. I mentioned it earlier about shield buffs. Spectro Rover can technically be thrown as like a rejuve bot, and if they have a negative status shield buff, you can use that Spectro Rover, his skills and whatnot, to actually proc that negative status to gain the additional damage, right? So let's say they have another tower where they have like the 16% damage reduction or whatever, but if you apply negative status, you do full damage, right? Well, then that means that Spectro Rover is essentially giving you a 16% damage amp if you throw them on a random team. So that's always something to keep in mind. you can actually use Spectro Rover for like show buffs and whatnot. And I think people should be considering characters within the context of show buffs, especially as Kuro is implementing more and more show buffs more often. It is one of the reasons why I consider Galbrena really strong, and it is one of the reasons why I think people have like bad opinions as far as like characters go. To touch on it briefly, think about like Carlotta. What can she realistically pair with show buffs? She can do glacial damage. She can do resonant skill damage. Those are the only show buffs she can really pair with, right? So she loses a lot of value there. Whereas Galbrena, what we mentioned earlier, she has like 8 different things. This is without Sig. He's gonna move up with Sig, I'm assuming. Chill, not much for me to say there. Probably, yeah, there's gonna be with Lupa and whatnot too. You're playing it with Sonhwa, it's pretty copium at that point. Camellia, dude, I feel so bad. Camellia is a character that has fallen off pretty hard. I see that as a Camellia main. She's literally my most invested character. And this character, I mean, she's not terrible. She still gets the clears. I play the free-to-play teams, and I still get clears, even on, like, DPM or the hardest towers and whatnot. I do that every single rotation. But she's definitely fallen off quite a good amount in value. Jinshi, expert +1. All right, I actually don't know what calcs they're using to justify Jinshi going up a tier. I would actually like to see that. I haven't seen Jinshi improving at all in any of the... I don't want to comment on this. I'm not going to comment on Jinshi. Sheng Liao, he did get buffed with Lynae, but, like, everyone got buffed with Lynae. So, LOL. Brand Sub-DPS, expert +1, expert +2. Okay, yeah. If they're considering like quick swap and whatnot, dude, I like this. The expert +2 on Chongli. One of the things we talked about when we were doing our tier list, like the full value tier list with Thunda, is that something people really undervalue is having a generalist in a game where you have so many teams that you need, right? You need 4 different teams in order to clear content, right? And a character like Chongli, who can literally go in every comp in the game, even if it's a little bit more copium, is actually pretty good. Now, it does kind of suck that she can't go with other 5 stars, or she has to go with other 5 stars, but she can literally pair on like with 70% of the roster. He mentioned like Lynae before Lynae. I wouldn't quite go that far because like, I mean, he means it in terms of versatility, and in that case, I agree because Chongli was that versatile, but you do have to be better, and it wasn't giving you Lynae tier performance relative to the rest of the cast at that stage of the game. So I wouldn't go that far, but the sentiment behind it, I agree with, where Chongli is a character that paired with a bunch of other characters, and it performed decently well. It'll get you clears if you understand what you're doing. I like the expert tag here, and yeah, I agree. I agree with this. Consorella, I agree with. Not much to say. I think people overrate Consorella just because she goes with Flova and they think you need Flova or you need Consorella for Flova. That's just not true. People often say like, oh, you get Consorella, you can proc multiple Hecates. All right, that's cool, I guess. Well, you can just use Donjin instead, and even though it's not procking the multiple Hecates, you're not losing that much damage, all right? It doesn't matter that much. Also, Flova has 30,000 options. So a character that needs other options is just not gaining much value for an account, or considering sub-DPS characters like that. Why are we playing? Or why are we trying to like justify pulling for them? Also, Consorella is one of those characters much like Qiuyuan, where the reality of their performance, especially since you can't really quick swap much during their windows, but even for non-quick swap characters, you get interrupted so much, especially during perception drain. She actually ends up performing a little bit worse in reality. Also, people don't consider how much damage you actually lose from Consorella because you have to build high energy regen on her, and the fact that she tanks the energy regen requirements of your teammates, making them be higher. So she does have more versatility in Jesha. I mean, Jesha kind of has negative versatility. Dude, I'm just thinking about this character right now. Lynae literally does. She's not even a resonant skill buffer, but she just better in her own teams, and she has more generalist buffs, and she just goes even higher with resonance lip. Dude, this yikes, bro. This is a yikes of a character. Phoebe partner Zani. Yeah, it's fine. Not much to say. Expert +1 on Brant. We kind of touched on that. Not much to say. I have not looked into Galtaro calcs with Lynae to see just how great he performs. I think napkin math should have this roughly accurate, but I'm not going to pretend to be Kalcharo expert. I've not looked into Ling Yong whatsoever either recently. And then I think Havoc Rover is misplaced. So Havoc Rover is misplaced. He should be over here, especially if you're doing like the multiple ult rotations, like you have like the Sunhwa Shorekeeper stuff, right? Low cost team. I'm not sure if they're considering cost on this for the DPSs. I don't think they are, but that's an extremely low cost team. It performs. You can do the double ult rotation inside of a single Shorekeeper ult with Havoc Rover, something I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. You can actually technically do the same thing with Encore, but I think Havoc Rover abuses it a little bit stronger. And then on top of that, Havoc Rover is one of the few characters where his ults linger so hard because he's a 1.0 character that he can actually, if timed properly, hit multiple waves. So in wave-based content, inside of Tower, for example, where you have multiple floors, he actually gains even more value there. So I've mentioned this multiple times. Every time I evaluate their tier list, I think they just don't play Havoc Rover. They just don't know what this character does, but they always underrate him. He should just be right here. Yo, wait, where's Alto? Do they not have 4 stars on here? What the hell? Yo, am I tripping, or did this list remove 4 stars? I filtered it. Oh. All right, I didn't talk about some of the 4 stars then. My bad. Let's talk about the 4 stars real quick. So Mortefi is the best 4-star character in the game currently. He's been the best 4-star character for a while. In the past, I've criticized Prydwen for putting him under Sunhwa for a long time when he shouldn't have been. Basically, since Augusta released, he should have been higher than Sunhwa, because the reality is Sunhwa only has Camellia as a character. So I'm going to kind of talk about both and like the history, because I think it's kind of interesting. People valued Sunhwa a lot because she was a character who paired with Camellia, who was near or was at the top of the game with a literal free-to-play team, right? It was Camellia, Sunhwa, Verina, right? And it was at the top of the tier list. Then you also had Encore Sunhwa, which was a strong team, and Havoc Rover Sunhwa. The problem is a lot of the people overvaluing Sunhwa are veterans. And that's something you have to keep in mind. They have like a previous screenshot in their minds of how Sunhwa used to perform that doesn't actually conform with like how Sunhwa performs in current reality. You also hear people see things like Cartia plus Sunhwa, but if you look up calcs for that, they perform about 50% or like 45% or whatever worse than just having Choen plus her signature, right? It's a really big difference to have Sunhwa versus not on Cartia teams, and the Cartia teams with Sunhwa aren't even good. People will mention Sunhwa as like a versatile character because they're fast rotation. Here's a problem. No character in the game outside of Encore, Camellia, or Havoc Rover makes use of that fast rotation. So having a fast rotation on Sunhwa doesn't actually do anything. Now, maybe in the future, they'll add characters where you can abuse the fast rotation, but with none of those characters being performers right now, even with that being the case, you can't justify having Sunhwa high up. Now, as far as Mortefi goes, Mortefi is actually like weirdly versatile. He can go with a bunch of characters. He can copy him with Jinshi. He can go with Qiuyuan. He can go with Phoebe. He can go with Zani. He can go with Augusta, and he can go with Galbrena. So that is a bunch of characters. Every single one of those teams can clear content. On top of that, some of those teams are even like pretty strong and can compete with some of the limited teams, right? Specifically with like Galbrena, specifically with like Lupa Encore, and oh yeah, I forgot to mention Lupa as well. And then specifically with Augusta, right? Those three teams, or like Lupa, Galbrena, Mortefi also, those teams are actually like legitimately pretty solid team where you can't really say the same with Sunhwa. So Mortefi is just like a pretty strong character. Bullying's weird because she like pairs well with characters who aren't that good right now because she's a resonant skill buffer and we just don't have resonant skill characters. I feel like when we get more resonant skill characters, Bullying will get more value, assuming they actually play nice with her kit. Her problem is like she's a pretty solid character, but then she like works with like the mediocre characters, right? So like not great characters. She's still good though, don't get me wrong. Great for negative status Shoba. Oh yeah. The same thing I mentioned with Havoc Rover, you can do the same thing with Bullying. That's also true. Something to keep in mind. Dungeon, I mentioned it before, you can put it with Flova. That's really her only legitimate use case now. You can technically clear if you pair it with Camellia. You can technically clear if you pair it with Havoc Rover, but you have to be extremely skillful and with really good builds. Yeah, kind of justified. Yeah, I will say it's kind of funny to have Elena Roja over here with Donjon, but it is what it is. Should just doesn't really have a place in the meta. You basically only have her on the team because you don't have Verina or Shorekeeper on your account. You're missing like one of them. That's the only real reason. Or you're using for side tower. Not much to say. The rest of these, do I really want to go over the rest? Are there any interesting use cases here? Not really. Though there is one thing I will point out. So people talk about like Carlotta as like a free-to-play option. I don't know why I see that. All right, I need an actual answer from you guys because I don't understand it. When I hear people talking about free-to-play options, I keep seeing like Carlotta brought up as a free-to-play option. Why is Carlotta brought up as a free-to-play option? I legitimately don't understand. With Daochi, she doesn't perform well. It's worse than like basically any of the other free-to-play teams in the game. Plus, you need signature. Plus, Daochi is trash. And the same thing is true with Lumi. I don't know why people keep mentioning Carlotta as like a free-to-play option. The signatures list does change a little bit. I'll just touch briefly on the changes. So Tricona goes up. We mentioned it before. Arrow res on the weapon means that you can pair with other arrow characters more easily, and you get more value out of that. So it's really strong. Res is one of the strongest mechanics in the game. Going up obviously just does more damage. Justified. Actually, honestly, I kind of explained everything about the characters, so let me just like see what changes and see if I think they're justified. Consorella going up. Whatever, it's fine. It's not a big deal. It is what it is. It's like the same relative placement. It doesn't really matter much. Brandt's going up if you have hands. Agree with that. Lee going up to here if you have hands, agree with that because of mono fusion shenanigans. Merit main DPS going up with like Lupa stuff, agree with that. Yeah, not much has changed, it looks like. There's not much for me to add. I gave you basically the context for every single character. I, for the most part, agree with this list. Mornye, the wheelchair of all time. Lynae down here. I don't really have much to add here. Obviously, any character that pairs with Flova gets upped in value. Monofusion is really high in value too. Verina is up here because of her synergy specifically with Plundering Totem. They moved up Yohu because of that as well. I'm not going to go in detail. I feel like I explained like most of the characters and how they work. They don't really work too differently in Whimpering Waste. I kind of don't consider Whimpering Waste a real game mode because you can take this Verina character, you can take this Yohu character, and you can take like Booling or something and you just throw them on a team and they just clear the entire game mode for free. Plunderer Totem is OP. The day they remove that is probably the day I'll consider this a real game mode. Until then, like, this game mode is just too easy. Flova is obviously the best character. Augusta's second best DPS. Pretty accurate. Yeah, something to point out too. The Electro DPSs get like buffed because they have extra synergy from the electro damage percent with Plunderer token. It's kind of OP. Or please, if you disagree with my overall thoughts, please do let me know. I care a lot, actually. I want to know. I want to improve my knowledge about this game. I must have said something wrong in there somewhere, right? No copium? Blame me for the Qiuyuan take.